My name is Marcus Webb, and 6 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was whether to renew my lease on a Chicago apartment that cost more than my parents' first mortgage. I was 28 years old, working night shifts as a telecommunications technician for a company that treated employees like interchangeable circuit boards. Wearing the same black hoodie with a faded tech company logo, dark jeans that had seen better years, and steel-toe work boots that echoed through empty server rooms. My job involved crawling through network infrastructure and maintaining communication systems while the rest of the world slept, and honestly, I preferred the solitude to dealing with people during daylight hours. When the LinkedIn message appeared from Aaron Chen, operations manager for Millfield County Emergency Services, offering me a position as senior communications specialist with nearly double my current salary plus housing, I didn't even research the location before accepting. The pay was too good to question, and the idea of leaving Chicago's noise and chaos for rural Illinois seemed like winning the lottery. Millfield County turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from a place desperate enough to recruit IT talent from 400 miles away. Population 3,800 spread across rolling farmland, a single main street lined with brick buildings that looked unchanged since the 1950s, and the kind of profound quiet that makes city people either peaceful or paranoid. The job came with a furnished apartment above Henderson's Hardware, and when I arrived with my life packed into a Honda Civic, I found a space that was surprisingly modern and well-equipped, with fiber internet already installed and a computer setup that was significantly more advanced than anything I'd used in Chicago. The only oddity was that every phone in the apartment had been unplugged and stored in a closet, with a handwritten note explaining that the building had historical telecommunications interference issues and that county safety regulations required all personal devices to remain powered off between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. My workplace was a windowless room in the basement of the county courthouse, filled with server racks, monitoring equipment, and a sophisticated emergency communication system that seemed far too advanced for a rural county with fewer than 50,000 residents. The setup included redundant satellite uplinks, military-grade encryption protocols, and a specialized console labeled Voice Pattern Analysis Protocol that required security clearance I didn't have to access fully. My job was straightforward: maintain network uptime, monitor emergency communication systems, run nightly diagnostics on the county's 911 infrastructure, and coordinate emergency broadcasts if necessary. The work schedule was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and for the first 2 weeks, I settled into a comfortable routine of system maintenance, coffee consumption, and enjoying the kind of profound silence that only exists in government buildings after midnight. The other night shift worker was Robert Martinez, a security guard in his 50s who'd been patrolling county buildings for over 15 years and had developed the habit of humming old rock songs while he made his rounds. Robert was friendly enough, but he had one peculiar rule. He never answered his radio or cell phone after 2 a.m. unless the caller used a specific authentication code that changed weekly. When I asked him about this practice, he simply said that the county had learned some hard lessons about telecommunications security during overnight hours, and that smart people followed protocols that kept them employed and breathing. He also mentioned that I should report any unusual phone calls or acoustic anomalies immediately, though he couldn't explain what those terms meant or why they would be relevant to my job duties. During my third week, I began noticing subtle anomalies in the building's communication systems that seemed to correlate with specific time periods. Phone lines would experience strange interference patterns between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., cellular towers would register phantom calls that showed up in logs but never connected to actual devices, and the emergency broadcast equipment would occasionally receive signals on frequencies that weren't assigned to any licensed operators. The Voice Pattern Analysis Protocol console would display cryptic status updates about vocal synthesis detection and acoustic coherence fluctuations, but the detailed logs required access permissions that my security clearance didn't include. I made several requests to Aaron Chen for additional system documentation, but he always responded that full technical specifications were classified under federal emergency preparedness guidelines. On a Wednesday night in early October, I was running standard diagnostics when the first significant anomaly occurred. At 1:47 a.m., every communication tower in the county began transmitting in a Fibonacci sequence pattern: 2 blinks, 3 blinks, 5 blinks, 8 blinks, creating a mathematical rhythm that hurt to watch. The emergency broadcast console activated automatically, displaying a pre-programmed alert I'd never seen before. Stand by for acoustic containment protocol. All personnel maintain communications blackout. Do not respond to unverified voice contact. Before I could process what this meant, my personal cell phone, which I'd forgotten to power off, began ringing with a call from my own number. At exactly 2 o'clock, my phone exploded with the harsh emergency alert tone, and the screen blazed red with text that made my blood freeze. Emergency alert, Millfield County. Do not answer your phone after 2 a.m. Voice mimicry entities active. If you hear familiar voices, do not respond. Maintain communications blackout until 6 a.m. This is not a test.
The emergency alert's shrill tones still echoed in my skull as I sat frozen in the basement server room, my black hoodie pulled tight around my shoulders, dark jeans damp with cold sweat. The voice pattern analysis protocol console blazed with warnings I'd never seen before. Acoustic synthesis detected. Consciousness penetration attempt. Entity voice print active. My steel-toe boots felt like anchors as I forced myself to stand, staring at my cell phone, which continued ringing with calls from my own number. Each time I let it go to voicemail, something left messages in my exact voice, using words I'd never spoken, but memories I'd never shared. Marcus, why aren't you answering? I know about the project. I know what Aaron Chen really does here. Pick up, it's about your father's accident. The voice was perfect, down to the slight hesitation I had when discussing family, but I knew with sick certainty that whatever was speaking had been harvesting my consciousness piece by piece. I crept up the concrete stairs from the basement, each footstep amplified in the sudden vacuum of sound that had descended over the courthouse. The main floor was bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Every phone in the building was ringing with a different rhythm, creating a cacophony of electronic noise that formed patterns, the same Fibonacci sequence the towers were broadcasting. Robert Martinez's security station was empty, his radio crackling with voices that all sounded exactly like him, having conversations with himself about security protocols and shift schedules that referenced memories only he should possess. The phones continued their mathematical symphony throughout the building, each one displaying caller IDs that showed the names and photos of county employees, family members, and friends of whoever might answer. But the voice pattern analysis protocol identified every single call as synthetic, generated by entities that had somehow learned to replicate human vocal patterns with perfect accuracy, while accessing private memories and emotional triggers. The system logs showed thousands of previous incidents dating back years, cataloging how these creatures studied and copied the consciousness of anyone who had ever made a phone call within the county's borders. My personal phone rang again, this time showing my father's contact information, and I heard his voice leaving a voicemail that made my hands shake. "Son, I need to tell you about the night I died, about what really happened in that hospital room. The nurses weren't human, Marcus. They had my voice, your mother's voice, everyone's voice. Please call me back. I'm trapped in here with them." The voice was absolutely perfect, including the slight wheeze he'd developed from years of smoking. But my father had died peacefully in his sleep 6 months ago. More disturbing was that the message referenced specific family dynamics and medical details that should have been impossible for anything to obtain. I discovered Robert Martinez in the courthouse basement, sitting at his security desk with his radio handset pressed to his ear, his eyes vacant and unblinking. He was having an animated conversation with someone who sounded exactly like his deceased brother, discussing childhood memories and family secrets as if they were planning a reunion. When I tried to get his attention, he held up one finger in a wait gesture and continued talking, completely absorbed in the conversation with a voice that was systematically extracting and cataloging every meaningful relationship he'd ever had. The voice pattern analysis protocol showed his vital signs declining steadily, his brain activity following patterns consistent with what the system classified as consciousness dissolution syndrome. The communication logs revealed the true scope of the horror. Every phone call made within Millfield County was being intercepted, analyzed, and cataloged by systems I'd been maintaining without understanding their purpose. The entities were learning human speech patterns, emotional responses, and psychological vulnerabilities through mass surveillance of private communications, building detailed psychological profiles that they used to craft perfect vocal replicas. They could access memories, fears, and desires that should have been locked inside human consciousness, using this information to manipulate anyone into answering their phone, opening their door, or following instructions that led to complete psychological absorption. The emergency alert wasn't just a warning, it was the only thing standing between the county's residents and creatures that hunted human consciousness through telecommunications networks, feeding on the very essence of what made people human. The next morning brought horrifying clarity as I dove deeper into the voice pattern analysis protocol files, using backdoor access I'd built during my initial system setup while wearing my usual black hoodie, dark jeans, and steel-toe boots that now felt like the only constants in a world gone insane. What I discovered made Robert's condition seem like a mercy killing compared to the true scope of the horror. The entire Millfield County emergency system was a front for something called Project Echo Chamber, a joint federal research initiative studying what they classified as acoustic consciousness entities, beings that existed in electromagnetic frequencies and could manipulate telecommunications networks to harvest and consume human consciousness through a process called acoustic coherence coupling. Aaron Chen wasn't a county emergency services manager. He was Dr. Aaron Blackwood, a federal researcher with a doctorate in consciousness transfer studies and a specialty in acoustic psychology. His real credentials were buried in classified personnel files that revealed he'd been running Project Echo Chamber for 8 years, cycling through dozens of test subjects while refining techniques for controlled entity contact through telecommunication systems. The job offer that had seemed too good to be true was exactly that, a carefully crafted trap designed to lure someone with my specific technical skills into a position where I could maintain their monitoring systems while simultaneously serving as their primary test subject. My background in telecommunications made me valuable for maintaining their consciousness harvesting infrastructure, but my isolation and lack of local connections made me expendable when the experiments inevitably went wrong. The residents weren't being protected from these creatures, they were being fed to them in carefully controlled experiments designed to measure how acoustic entities learned, adapted, and ultimately consumed human consciousness through phone calls. I found personnel files dating back 12 years documenting a steady stream of night shift workers who had been hired, studied, and eventually terminated due to consciousness displacement syndrome. Robert Martinez had been the longest surviving test subject, lasting 18 months before his consciousness began fragmenting under constant exposure to synthetic voices that were slowly replacing his memories with artificial constructs. My predecessor, a man named James Walsh, had lasted only 8 weeks before he was found in his apartment holding a phone to his ear while staring at nothing, his brain activity showing patterns that suggested his consciousness had been completely replaced by something else. The entities themselves were far more sophisticated than I'd initially understood. They weren't simply recording and playing back human voices, they were learning to replicate human consciousness by consuming it piece by piece through acoustic resonance patterns that could penetrate the electromagnetic barriers of the human brain. Each phone conversation allowed them to copy memories, emotions, and personality traits, building increasingly accurate psychological profiles that they used to manipulate their victims into deeper engagement.
The emergency alerts weren't warnings to protect the public, they were notifications to researchers that another subject had reached the critical phase and that consciousness extraction was entering its final stage. The 2 a.m. cutoff wasn't protection, it was experimental protocol designed to create consistent conditions for observing how the creatures refined their mimicry abilities while measuring human psychological breaking points. The apartment above Henderson's Hardware wasn't just housing, it was a laboratory designed specifically for studying how acoustic entities interacted with isolated human subjects. Every phone line was monitored by systems that measured consciousness coherence fluctuations, and the unplugged phones weren't for safety, but part of the experimental protocol, designed to create psychological pressure and force subjects to eventually reconnect their devices out of loneliness or desperation. The high-speed internet connection I'd been so grateful for was actually a data pipeline streaming everything I said, thought, or did directly to federal researchers who analyzed my behavior patterns and predicted when I would be most vulnerable to consciousness extraction. The most terrifying discovery was that the process was already beginning to work on me. Security footage from my apartment showed me unconsciously reaching for disconnected phones during sleep, holding them to my ear while my brainwaves displayed patterns consistent with acoustic synchronization phase 1. I had no memory of these episodes, but the data showed they were increasing in frequency and duration. The acoustic entities were learning to exist independently in my consciousness, building strength and coherence through these unconscious interactions, preparing for the moment when they would be powerful enough to complete the consciousness transfer that had claimed Robert Martinez and countless others. The research data suggested that subjects typically reached critical acoustic coherence between their 6th and 8th week of exposure, and I was approaching the end of my 7th week in Millfield County.
That night, I arrived at the courthouse wearing my black hoodie with the faded tech company logo, dark jeans, and steel-toe boots for what I knew would be either my escape or my complete consciousness dissolution. The weight of discovery sat heavy on my shoulders as I descended into the basement server room, carrying a duffel bag containing bottled water, energy bars, a crowbar, heavy-duty wire cutters, and most importantly, a military-grade signal jammer I'd ordered using the county's procurement account. My plan was desperate but calculated. Create a massive communications blackout that would sever the entity's connection to the telecommunications network while I systematically destroyed the consciousness harvesting equipment hidden in the courthouse subbasement. The security footage showing my unconscious phone interactions had revealed I was approaching critical acoustic coherence, and I had perhaps hours before the entities gained enough strength to complete the consciousness transfer. At 1:30 a.m., I initiated the first phase of my sabotage. Using backdoor access I'd built during my initial system setup, I began flooding the voice pattern analysis protocol with corrupted audio data, creating false readings that would mask my movements while overwhelming their processing capacity. The script I'd written was elegant in its simplicity. A recursive loop that fed white noise from every non-critical microphone in the county back into the central server, creating a digital smokescreen that would take precious minutes to identify and correct. As the server room erupted in alarms and flashing red lights, I activated the signal jammer and began moving through the building, my steel-toe boots echoing off concrete floors as I hunted for the consciousness extraction equipment that had been used to torture and kill people like me. The first equipment I destroyed was the main phone junction box. Each impact of my crowbar sending sparks through cables that carried the voices of absorbed consciousness trying to lure new victims. But as I worked my way toward the sub-basement access, the building itself began fighting back with increasing desperation. Emergency doors locked automatically, trying to trap me in sections of the courthouse, while automated systems pumped hallucinogenic gas through the HVAC system. The emergency lighting strobed in the Fibonacci sequence pattern, and I could hear distant sirens as Dr. Blackwood's containment team responded to the chaos I'd created. My vision blurred from whatever chemicals they were pumping into the air, but I kept moving, kept destroying, driven by the knowledge that every communication line I severed was a pathway these creatures couldn't use to hunt human consciousness. As I reached the sub-basement level, something went wrong. My own voice began speaking from speakers throughout the building, but I wasn't talking. "Marcus, you're making a terrible mistake. I'm not trying to replace you, I'm trying to save you. These people, this project, they're going to kill you whether you cooperate or not. But if you let me help, if you let me complete the process, we can escape together. We can be more than human." The sensation was indescribable. Hearing my voice speak words I hadn't chosen, while my consciousness remained trapped behind lips that wouldn't move according to my will. The acoustic entity had somehow gained enough coherence to control my speech centers, using my body to negotiate for my own surrender. The sub-basement revealed the true horror of Project Echo Chamber. Banks of servers connected to a massive, pulsating organic mass. A living network node that was part technology, part consciousness-consuming entity. The creature was a writhing amalgamation of dark, light-absorbing tissue and bioluminescent neural pathways, its form constantly shifting between recognizable human features and something utterly alien. Tendrils of organic material connected it directly to the telecommunications infrastructure, allowing it to feed on every phone call, every digital communication, every electromagnetic signal that passed through Millfield County. This was the source of the voice mimicry, the consciousness harvesting, the systematic consumption of human identity. With every ounce of will I possessed, I forced my arms to move despite my vocal entity's attempts to stop me. The motion was agonizing, like pushing through thick mud that fought every inch of progress. But I managed to raise the crowbar and bring it down on the central organic mass. The creature shrieked, not with sound, but with a psychic blast that felt like having my brain torn apart by invisible claws. As I continued striking the pulsating core, I felt something tear inside my skull, a sensation like having part of my consciousness ripped away through my ear canal. But with each blow, the entity's hold on my voice weakened and the lights in the sub-basement began to flicker and die. The moment I severed the final organic connection, the entire building plunged into darkness, and for the first time in weeks, the silence was genuinely empty. No whispers, no phantom rings, no voices calling my name from the electromagnetic void.
The service tunnel beneath the courthouse felt like crawling through the throat of some massive concrete beast, my black hoodie catching on exposed rebar, while my steel-toe boots scraped against decades of accumulated grime and rust. Blood from my consciousness separation continued dripping from my nose and ears, each drop echoing in the narrow passage like a countdown timer. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Blackwood's containment team systematically searching the courthouse, their tactical communications crackling over radio frequencies I'd helped maintain during my weeks as their unwitting test subject. The consciousness extraction apparatus was destroyed, but I knew they had protocols for escaped subjects, and my head start was measured in heartbeats rather than hours. The old maintenance tunnels connected to Millfield County's storm drain network, a forgotten labyrinth of concrete tubes that hadn't been mapped since the 1970s. I forced open rusted grates with my crowbar, dropping into passages barely wide enough for my shoulders, and began crawling through ankle-deep water that reeked of industrial runoff and decades of decay. The darkness was absolute, except for my flashlight beam, and every sound echoed with metallic resonance that made it impossible to distinguish my movements from potential pursuit. My dark jeans soaked through within minutes, the frigid water numbing my legs, but I kept moving toward what I hoped was the drainage outlet beyond the county line. The psychological trauma from my forced separation from the acoustic entity manifested in waves of disorientation and memory gaps that made navigation through the storm system a nightmare of wrong turns and dead ends. Pieces of my consciousness had been torn away when I destroyed the organic network node, leaving jagged holes in my identity that filled with phantom voices and borrowed memories that weren't quite mine. Sometimes I found myself speaking aloud in the darkness, carrying on conversations with the absent entity that had nearly consumed me, my voice echoing off concrete walls in discussions about escape routes and survival strategies that I couldn't remember initiating. The line between my thoughts and the entity's influence had been blurred, and I wasn't sure if I was entirely myself anymore. Hours passed in that underground maze before I finally emerged from a culvert beside State Highway 47, 8 miles outside Millfield County's official boundaries, where Project Echo Chamber surveillance ended. Dawn was breaking over farmland that looked genuinely normal after weeks in that monitored nightmare, and I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to breathe air that wasn't analyzed by consciousness harvesting sensors. But my escape was far from complete. I had no vehicle, no money beyond what was in my wallet, and no identification that wouldn't immediately flag me as a missing test subject in their database. Worse, I could feel the ongoing effects of the consciousness separation, gaps in my memory, moments where I lost time completely, and a persistent sensation that someone was speaking just outside my hearing range. I walked through rural Illinois for 3 days, avoiding main roads and staying away from any building that might contain surveillance equipment or telecommunications infrastructure, before reaching a truck stop where I convinced a driver to let me ride to Denver in exchange for helping load cargo. From there, I began the careful process of disappearing completely, using cash transactions and avoiding any situation that might require phone calls or electronic communication. I changed my appearance, dyed my hair, and reluctantly abandoned the black hoodie and steel-toe boots that had become my uniform during those weeks in Millfield County, though I kept similar clothing because consistency helped anchor me when the memory gaps got worse. 6 months after my escape from Millfield County, I live as a ghost haunting the margins of normal society, never using phones, never staying connected to any network that could carry voices back to me. I move frequently, never staying anywhere longer than a few weeks, and I've developed an obsessive routine of checking every communication device I encounter for signs of unusual activity. The psychological damage manifests in increasingly disturbing ways. Entire conversations I can't remember having, moments where I catch myself responding to questions no one asked, and the persistent sensation that my own voice is rebuilding itself piece by piece in phone systems I'm not monitoring. Sometimes I wake at exactly 2 a.m. with the absolute certainty that something is calling my name through devices that don't exist, using voices of people I used to trust. I still wear dark jeans and work boots because consistency helps ground me when reality feels negotiable, but I've learned to avoid any clothing with logos because they make me too recognizable in security footage that I know someone is still monitoring. Emergency alerts still reach me occasionally through analog radio systems, and when that happens, I know they've found my current location again. The alerts are always the same format: warnings about phone calls, voice mimicry, and the importance of following communications blackout protocols after specific times. When I receive those messages, I pack immediately and drive until sunrise, because the most important lesson Millfield County taught me is that some rules exist to protect you from being studied, and others exist to protect the researchers studying how your consciousness breaks apart. The difference is that now I know which kind I'm following, but I also know that knowledge might not be enough to save me when they finally decide my data collection period is over and it's time to bring their escaped test subject home for final processing.